We're absolutely in the game, and we would be arguably at the high level. It's expensive here. I'm supposed to cover the territory between Japan and Australia, and I can't find my way back to the hotel at night. It's like, what'll I do? Probably had 2 nervous breakdowns during that time.
My guest today on the Red Couch is Roddy Carr. Now, this is a name that may not be known to the average Bajan. If you're a golfer, you know that name. And if you're a golfer and you've really done your homework, you'll know that it's a name that's been associated with golf for many, many decades. But we'll get into that story about who Roddy Carr is over the next half an hour or so as we chat with this legend of golf building and marketing and sports generally, not just here in Barbados and in the Caribbean, but across the globe. He's from Ireland. I'll give you a little insight right there and then. He's from Dublin, Ireland, and has spent quite a bit of time here in Barbados. We'll get right into that. So Roddy, welcome to the Red Couch. I wanted to do this. I know you're winding down your current assignment at Apesill Golf Course, and you are a major shareholder. I think you're the biggest single individual shareholder in the Barbados Golf Club. So you put your money where your mouth is, up at Durance. But you were the man who built the golf course. But we're going to come back to that in a little bit. But tell me a little bit about your early life. When we were chatting before, you said that you've divided your life into chapters. So I'm going to go back beyond sort of a preface to chapter 1 and ask you to tell me a little bit about your early childhood. What was that like for an Irish lad growing up in Dublin, Ireland?
Well, I had a very famous father, Joe Carr. He was an amateur golfer at the time. He couldn't afford to be a pro. There was no money in the game. And he had 6 children, and we lived on a golf course. So our house was like Grand Central Station. We got 20 pints of milk a day delivered to the house. That was the amount of traffic in it. You never know who was going to be in the bed next to you at the house. So it was literally like a clubhouse. So we had the most beautiful upbringing right on the sea on a 9-hole golf course where really it was just freedom to go everywhere. It was a bit like Barbados. You can walk around. Nobody was in trouble. People would look after you. There was nobody locking your doors or locking your houses or anything in those days. It was a beautiful upbringing in a very happy atmosphere.
Tell me a little bit about your dad, because I've heard a lot about him. I've read some of the articles you wrote about your dad. He was world amateur golf champion. I'm sure if he had gone pro, based on his record, that he would have been even famous as a pro golfer.
Yeah, and lots of people ask me, I mean, he was leading the British Open as an amateur with 12 holes to go and really was competitive with the greatest players in the world at the time. But the bottom line was he had 6 kids and you couldn't feed them because you weren't allowed to take money for 6 months in those days, and the money you made would barely be able to survive, and he had a clothing business, so there was no option for him in basically being able to do that.
Chapter 1, tell me about your chapter 1 now.
Chapter 1, it was like I was a very good amateur and I played in the Walker Cup and we beat America, and I was supposed to make millions on the tour, and Mark McCormack, this famous sports marketing, the guy who actually created sports marketing, signed me up, and I was supposed to make millions and be the next superstar coming out because I had a very good record as an amateur from what my father had taught me. And I spent 10 years on the tour trying to make it work. And at the end of the day, probably in those days, there wasn't all these teams of psychiatrists. I probably had 2 nervous breakdowns during that time. I owed the bank manager 10 grand and I had to go to work after 10 years. So I was fortunate that the guy who managed me, Mark McCormack, wanted to hire me and bring me over to Cleveland, Ohio. So the minute I got to Cleveland, I remember one day I got off the plane, and I'm 30 years of age now. I'd never been inside an office in my life. I was able to lift everything I owned off the ground after 10 years on the tour, and I'm going, oh God, next chapter, roll on. So when I got in there, my nickname became the Broken Down Tour Pro because I didn't make it. So I've had to live with that nickname ever since. But I was fortunate because I was wrapped around all these Harvard graduates in IMG, and he was the guy who started sports marketing with Beyond Borg, Arnold Palmer, Gary Player, Jack Nicklaus, everybody. And these guys kind of taught me on the road how to become an agent and how to become a sports marketing, Jerry Maguire kind of a guy. I phoned my father and I said, Pop, I feel like an ant here. I don't know how to crack this place. I'm supposed to cover the territory between Japan and Australia. and I can't find my way back to the hotel at night. What'll I do? He said, where's the nearest golf course, son? I said, well, there's one Fanling. He said, find 2 paddies in the golf course. I said, okay. So I went to the golf course, found 2 people who they knew him, connected in. I joined the golf club. Within 3 months, I was on the boats of the 2 taipans in Hong Kong who ran the place for Southeast Asia. And that's how I learned to network through that. And then I was able to function. The next was a funny one because I really said, I'm going to take a year out. So I came to Barbados, and I really was introduced to Barbados through Sam Mahone, who used to come to Ireland. And when I was on the tour, I would come to Gibbs Beach, and I had no money. And we'd have a little scooter and a pair of flip-flops and a T-shirt. And Sam would move Patty and I in between houses, in between rents, because he wouldn't have to charge us then. So we would spend 2 weeks living, and he would take us home and give us food and feed us. And I was trying to stay away from the golfing crowd, so I kind of fell in love with the locals. But I came back to Barbados for a year off, and Dermot Desmond heard I was coming. And he was they just bought Sandy Lane. And Dermot said, we'd like you to keep an eye on the build. Would you do that for them? I'm thinking, would I? What? Delighted. Tom Fazio designing the golf courses, wow. Who was somebody who I saw his product in Vegas, and I wanted to see him work. Anyway, bottom line is I ended up working with Dermot as a consultant to help oversee the building of Sandy Lane for the first year. And I was about to go home, and Ralph Johnson, the famous, Ralph, came into Dermot. The Bruggers, yeah. Came into Dermot Desmond and said, you've taken half of 9 holes over the old Sandy Lane. The locals don't know where to play. And we have an old course up by the airport, and will you give us $5 million to fix it and get it up and going for the locals? So Dermot didn't think that was a great idea, and I did. So the next day he gave it to me, and he said, have a look at that, Roddy. And Sir Harold St. John was there at the time, and he actually had the vision to realise the importance of the Barbados Golf Club to the hotels on the south coast. Anyway, I went back the next day and I said, I'd like to do this. And I met Ralph, and I got on well with Ralph. And then we kind of embraced and went on this journey together to raise the money with the local people all down the south coast, the hoteliers, the people, the golfers. And I brought in Ron Kirby, who was one of the old architects and a shaper, a guy I knew. And we built it the old-fashioned way, in the ground, into the dirt, with a portal cabin, which took us about 18 months. And then Owen Arthur opened it for us on, I think it was on the year 2000. Yeah. You were there for that. And you were our chairman, so that was the best move.
Yeah. So tell me about the Apes story, because Apes was taken over by Glenn Chimandi. And I've seen a bit of it. I've been up a couple of times, and what I'm seeing is just like next level, out of this world kind of thing.
Yeah. I mean, I knew Cal Williams very well. He was the one who helped us way back in 2000, because he lent us machines. He knew we didn't have any money. I drove him around there, and he was telling me, I built that road with my bare hands, and I called him the Clint Eastwood of Barbados. And
that's a nice description, actually. Very apt.
It is, because he had the bow legs, the wrinkled face. And it was funny, I told him the story about Clint Eastwood and Don't Let the Old Man In. And he said, well, people have called me Clint Eastwood for years here. So he was fun. But Cow actually, again, the vision he had, he was out in St. Lucia and he saw a golf course there, and he said, oh, I have Apes Hill and I'll make a golf course. So he went in to build a golf course, and then he got a partnership there who built what they thought they wanted, but it really didn't fit. And they built the golf course too tough. So there was nobody there to advise Cow. So as it came around, the end of that, Glenn Chimandi ended up being the selected buyer for this. And I have to give the Prime Minister, I think she, probably helped make sure he got it, because this man has been living and working in Barbados for 18 years with Gildan, the shirt people. They make 500 million shirts. So I think Sir Paul Altman advised Glenn he should talk to me, because I'd been involved in the courses here, Sandy Lane, Barbados Golf Club, and I'd redone the golf course in Bermuda, Port Royal. And I said to Glenn, I think what happened to Cow was he had nobody sitting on his side of the table to make sure that he got it right. And I said, I'd like to help you, because it's a most beautiful site. And I explained what I saw, what the vision. And I said to him, what do you want here, Glenn? He said, I want a place where people like me and a group of like-minded, active people who like to have fun can all live together and be happy. And I want whatever we need to do that. And that was the definition of the product. So my job then was to, in my space, the golf box I called it, I kind of set a plan out for him to fix the golf course so it'll be more enjoyable, make it the most enjoyable experience for golf in the Barbados, build a par 3 for the kids and the grandmothers and the wives and the players who are beginning, build a state-of-the-art Mayo Clinic of performance centres with all the latest technology, and a practice ground that people can enjoy themselves. So he basically said, I like that, go ahead and do it. So I've been probably the most enjoyable 3 years of my career have been here in the last 3 years, being enabled and allowed to really help him realize the dream.
Numerically, do we have enough golf courses now in Barbados of a standard that is acceptable, assuming the caveats and the improvements that you just mentioned on the south to take place? Would we have enough to be considered a serious golf destination? Are we now?
Yeah, I mean,
are we now clear in that regard?
I've done the golf tourism strategies for probably 8 countries over the last 15 years as part of my sports tourism thing. Without doubt, we have 5 golf courses here which are world class. So you need a minimum of 3. The golfer comes for 7 days, he wants to play 3 golf courses. He doesn't want to play 1 golf course.
So we are in the game.
No, we're absolutely in the game, and we would be arguably at the high level. It's expensive here, but that's the market we're after. So at that level, there's no better product out there at the level we're talking.
Thank you very much. Continue the journey, continue to live an amazing life, and thank you for taking time out and coming and sharing your story with us here on the Red Couch. I am sure that there are other chapters, and I look forward to those in the future.
Thank you, Vic, and thank you for being chairman of the Barbados Golf Club and keeping us going for 20 years.
Well, thank you very much. Roddy Carr, my special guest today on the Red Couch, an incredible Irishman. You know, the Irish have a way, wherever they go in the world, they make their mark. Thank you very much for being my special guest today.